Hello everyone, my name is Jen Wei and I'm the editor at digital news platform TheHomeGround Asia, which is hosting this panel discussion that we're going to start in a few minutes. I'm really happy to be moderating the panel with our beautiful guests from Brown Voices, Singapore's first collective of Indian playwrights. In the next hour or so, they'll be talking about two new works that explore the identity of the Singaporean Tamil woman and seek to remedy her invisibility, called Thamizhachi and Rasanai. These works are part of TWorks' annual Now Festival of Women, which was initiated in 2019 by theatre artist and arts educator Nolina Mohammed. The festival is ongoing until the end of July. So before we start the conversation, I'd like to introduce my three guests. To my left is Vithya Subramaniam. She's a curator-researcher and currently completing a doctorate in anthropology at the University of Oxford in England. She's also a writer. And to her left is Raj Thiagaras. He's a theatre practitioner, also an actor, a writer. And do you direct as well, I believe? A little bit?
But mostly I act and write.
Okay. And last but not least, Grace Kalaiselvi. She's also a theatre practitioner, an arts educator, and a writer, director, and an actress.
Yes, I am.
So before we start, let's start. I'd like to direct my first question to Vithya. Since you conceptualized both the works, I really wanted to know why you decided to focus specifically on the Singaporean Tamil woman and how you've managed to with both works.
So I think when Grace approached me asking about a concept for Now Festival, what we quite immediately wanted to do was definitely represent a brown voice, right? We are, after all, brown voices. And we thought, let's look at a subject that we know very well, but we feel isn't talked about or seen very often, and that's the Tamil woman that Grace and I both are. And so that was our starting point. Yeah.
Okay, and then I guess the idea of using the museum in a digital format, what made you choose to use this space to look at the Tamil woman? Yeah,
so the museum form, I think, comes quite naturally to me. I am a fan of museums. I always try to go to a museum. And also because I'm studying human-object relationships, it's also something that I'm just always thinking about these days. So I thought I'd just draw on what I'm already thinking about in this work. As far as the digital format goes, it's really a practicality. And a practicality that worked out really well in these times, that we can still go on and visitors can still come in and view the work without fear of restrictions and stuff. What also really helps with the form is that it's not constrained by size. So the museum can be as small or as big. It can be one day or it can last a whole year. Yeah, so in this case, the digital format really helped.
Okay, and in terms of both Raj and Grace, what were your contributions at the conceptualizing stage?
As for myself, I think I was brought in mostly, firstly to translate for the objects in the museum in itself, but also as kind of like a co-facilitator in the workshops that were led by Vithya with the participants, just to hang out with the ladies during the workshops and just to learn more about their narratives itself. I think that was a great experience for me, and I think that's how I hope to have contributed a little bit to the project. Yeah.
And yourself, Grace?
For me, I was roped in more for the Rasanai, the performance element, more than the Thamizhachi museum, because I think the museum is something new for me, and so it's her project, her baby project, so I let her handle it. I will just be there to help her when she needs assistance during the workshop. Yeah. So if she needs me to be one of the participants, I will be there for her, that kind of thing. That was the role I was playing. So my role for that museum is pretty small. I'm more of the director for the Rasanai performance.
Okay, well, looking at the title of Thamizhachi, the idea of being under construction, how is it so important to highlight? Because the idea of not just a museum always evolving, but also the the Tamil woman.
Yeah, so I was definitely playing on that double meaning of under construction, right? In that both the Tamil woman identity and also the museum is perpetually in flux, right? It's always being constructed, always changing, always adapting to the times, which is why now it's called under construction. Yeah.
Okay, and how do you see that actually working out in real life? Like, do you see it going beyond the festival?
So, one component of the online museum is that on the objects page and also on each object's page is a comment box where visitors can come and leave a note about each object that's already up there or suggest an additional object that can go up. So in that sense, it's a construction that isn't just made by us and the existing workshop participants, but also visitors, can continue adding to the collection, continue especially adding their stories to the objects on hand.
And for both Raj and Grace, how did you contribute to this construction?
For me is, we often have discussions about the objects that meant to be going up, or even with the participants in the workshop itself, about the questions that were going to be asked to them. And there's numerous ways that we were doing this. For me, basically, like certain objects that I felt personal about, I think this is an angle that you must touch on because it's an unseen angle, like the sweeping broom. Because for me, like there was a whole generation of Tamil women who were sweepers in Singapore. So this kind of things, information that I know that they may not know, I push it to them. Yeah. Maybe you should consider this factor. So that was how I was participating.
Yeah, and I think for me the most interesting part when we were all kind of ideating how the museum should be in those early months was I think the naming of it itself, because I think we struggled for a while to actually get like a really good name for this, and when we finally struck upon Thamizhachi, I think the most interesting thing about that is because Thamizhachi in itself is a very colloquial way of calling the Tamil women. In formal Tamil it's more of Tamil Pen, but that term carries a kind of formalization which I think harks back to a more of a traditional conformity that we didn't, I think, want to box our participants or to the audiences who are wanting to access this museum. So I think we felt that Thamizhachi as a term was more open, was more inclusive, and was more, I think, varied in the sense that women who identify in multitude of ways and may not subscribe to that kind of traditional narrative that's been laid out for them could then access it through this term. So it's I think moments like this that it really brought I think the museum together in terms of its creation and the kind of processes that we went through. So I think all these careful considerations was at play.
Yeah, and also going back to this idea that there is no singular Tamil woman. How are you going to sort of break the misrepresentations or maybe the limitations of what a Tamil woman is through this museum?
Right, so I think it starts with our call for participants in the workshop. Well, I guess it starts first with the idea that we alone cannot create this, that this needs to be a collaboration with other people who are the subject, right, who are themselves Thamizhachi. So that's just like step one. Step two was about how we gathered participants, and the main requirement was that you self-identify as a Singaporean Tamil woman. That's it. So we weren't like checking documents, we weren't checking histories and ancestries. So as long as you subscribe to this term, we're cool with you, right? And so because it was kind of ground up and it was built by the people who are being represented, it was a way to already capture the natural diversity that already exists in this category instead of trying to impose a top-down border, which would be too, like Raj was saying, too restrictive and too exclusionary.
And did you discover anything that surprised you, like any of you, in terms of just the objects or the people coming forward who self-identified?
Well, personally, because even though I'm a Singaporean Tamil woman, I did not take Tamil in school. And I was surprised by how many other participants also did not take Tamil in school, but still held so strongly to this identity and were very happy to be welcomed into a place where they can say, hi, I'm Tamil. I don't speak it, but I still am.
Yeah.
You know, so that I was very happy with.
So I guess that was one of the ways of sort of defining what a Tamil woman is, the language of. So would you be comfortable to actually remove, like, while you're defining these different types of women, you're also removing things that no longer maybe are relevant?
I don't know about removing, because it's relevant to someone else. You know, so it's not so much about narrowing down, but just developing how we frame each object. Yeah.
Okay. And for you, Raj,
Yes.
just the idea of tokenism, were you confounded or surprised, or did you have any questions of your own as a Tamil man?
To be honest, I don't think I was that much surprised about the tokenism aspect of it, because even though I'm a man, I have seen, like, I guess general representations of the community itself can be very tokenistic, whether you're a man or a woman. But I think what I was more surprised by was the very individual aspects of, like, whether it's the objects or the stories that they carried, and the kind of similarities that even I could kind of strangely identify with, like, the participants coming, because I've heard some of these stories from my own grandmother and my mother and my sisters, and I was just very surprised to find that kind of similarities that's lying, even though we come from hugely different backgrounds as well. So I think for me, I think as a guy being in this space, I think it was just very interesting for me to kind of keep in mind about being respectful of the boundaries, in the sense of trying to understand them in their own terms and not trying to prescribe something to them during the sessions as well, but also to just sometimes just, you know, chill and take a step back and just look at the bigger picture that's forming with all these conversations that were kind of happening, and, you know, just organically letting their ideas come into play. Like, even with the selection of objects that went on, I think a large influencing factor were these stories that were told by the participants. So it's not a very top-down approach in saying, okay, we are like deciding this based on what we know. It was more of like, okay, we've gotten all these stories, how much can we include and what makes sense in the bigger picture. So I think that's where I think the participants also were able to kind of find that kind of inclusion in being part of this creation. So although, like, we may be kind of like the main team behind it, I wouldn't say we're the only ones doing it. There's definitely a bigger group of women out there who have contributed greatly to this. And as a guy, I think just being witness to that is already, I think, a momentous turn. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to talk now maybe about the idea of Tamil women being invisible. For Grace, did you feel this way? I mean, before coming onto this project?
Okay, maybe I can talk from a personal experience kind of a thing, because I did feel invisible within my community as well as outside of my community, in the sense that within my community is more of a male dominant thing that was present at the moment. So even in the theatre circle itself, the more importance was given to the male director. You won't really see a female director. You have to really push your way through. And that itself made me feel very invisible at that point. It's like, there are people, but why is it that I don't hear of them, see them as frequently as I hear and see the male directors themselves? And even in the outside circle, it was also, again, difficult to push myself out to be seen, because I think the recognition that was available for the other languages, be it Chinese or Malay, it was much more stronger than the Indian element. It was a struggle when I started out doing directing. I really had to push my way through. I have to give free tickets to different drama groups to get them to come and see my show, and then know that, hey, I exist, engage me in programs, get me involved in programs, and it worked in a way. So the invisibility still exists, according to me, but it slowly it's improving lah. That's the way I will see it.
Yeah. What are your thoughts to that?
Yeah, definitely. I think I can see that. And coming, I think, from a man's perspective, you know, although I may be a minority in racial terms, but I do have certain privileges of being a man in itself that sometimes I'm not conscious of. And it's looking at some of these examples, like seeing Grace's work and hearing about her struggles starting out in theatre, sometimes makes me reflect on my own privileges and opportunities that I've had, that I didn't have to, you know, think too much about how I got them. So again, I think being part of this project really gave me that light to kind of really do some introspection and maybe some retrospection about the kind of invisibility that being faced by Tamil women in general, and then and how not to be a part of that problem, very importantly. But also sometimes it's not about like asking men to like, please, take action or what, but just getting them to listen to a different side of the story and getting them to just understand that there's a difference in the way that they are viewing the world that favors males over the female side of the spectrum. So I think it's just sometimes it's just chipping at the block a bit and hopefully just trying to become more visible behind that wall. Yeah.
And for Vithya, like, how do you think the museum will help to create more visibility aside from literally showing the objects that relate to these women? I mean, how do you bring that outside of the museum space as well?
I think, so for me, what's really important and the reason why I like working with objects is that the object itself starts off seemingly neutral, but it's when you dig into it and you pay attention to how objects move in our lives, you see how different aspects of lives and identities get enacted. So that is what fascinates me with the museum form. It's how you take something that isn't a person, and yet it tells you so much about a person, right? And it's this different way of talking about identity, talking about life, that I hope excites people. And it's, when people go and visit the museum, it's not just about seeing what objects have been listed down, but it's about reading personal notes from the participants themselves about, how this object has popped up in their lives and all these like memories they have. And fundamentally, it's about making human, to hear someone and to recognize their voice and notice their presence.
So it's a sort of entrance
Yeah.
into someone.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, speaking of objects, then let's go to how you curated the objects and how these how many people came forward with ideas or experiences and stories.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to hear about the workshops first?
Yeah, definitely, because that was the first.
Yeah, absolutely. So it started with workshops, and these were workshops over 3 weeks, and it was basically facilitated activities that all work to reveal objects from the Tamil women's lives. And one of my favorite ones was after the first session, we kind of gave them homework, which was to go home and pay close attention to the things you have and take notice basically, and then bring one back for the second session. And when they did, I think all of us, the other participants as well, just like started learning whole new things about not just each other, but new ways of being Tamil. Someone would say, oh, my mother says, we must do it this way. And someone was like, I've never heard this before. Is this even a Tamil thing? Or someone would be like, oh, Tamil Christians do it this way. And we're like, wow, no one else knows, right? So that was very helpful. The other major part of the process was the discussion we had in the second week. And I must say, honestly, I was quite surprised by how deep this conversation got. Basically, I asked them, who is the audience you want to make this museum for, right? And I assumed that everyone was going to say, oh, we want to make it for other people. We want other people to know us. But that was not at all the case. I think pretty much everybody immediately went, we want to make this for other Tamil women. So we want other Tamil women to see that they are being represented, to see that they are being seen. And so that then became the kind of guiding lens.
Do you think that changed because of the first session, when they discovered so much about each other and about being Tamil?
Perhaps. And maybe it wasn't so much about the discovering about each other, because that was a bit more in the second week, but it's about seeing each other come into that space and have this like common purpose of, we are going to make a museum together. We are going to make representations about ourselves instead of someone else doing it, some other invisible hand doing it. And so I think that first session kind of really helped people have ownership over the project. And so when it came back in the second session, they felt like, okay, let's also include other people who might not be at the workshop, but who are like us. Let's try and find ways to have them included in the piece as well.
Okay, so sorry to keep sort of singling you out as the as the only man in the group, but did these objects mean something to you too? Because I mean, they're specific to gender or just being Tamil?
For me, I think it's a bit different because I may not have experienced these like personally myself, but I have grown up with like my sisters and my aunts and my mother and grandmother, and just me and my dad were the only males in the family sometimes. So like just growing up and listening to those stories and the kind of objects that they kind of they keep or they inherit and the kind of associated narratives that come out of it. So I think since growing up, I wasn't surprised a lot with some of the narratives, but I think it was just interesting for me to make those connections at times, especially when I was thinking about some of the objects being brought out, and I was like, oh yeah, my late grandmother also used to do that, and then it kind of made instant connections on the spot for me, which I've never thought about before, and I think it just made me kind of reflect on my own heritage as well, and the place of the women in my lives, the kind of great part that they played in both my upbringing, but also my cultural awareness. And there is truly, I think there is really some truth to what they say about sometimes women having that kind of tradition of upholding cultural values through the stories that they carry, because I think with me or with my dad or with the men in my life, we don't necessarily have that kind of active impulse to kind of think of these stories or think about objects, but with the women, it's always that those conversations are always circling around. So I think that was the most interesting part for me when I was just witnessing the participants talking about it. I think one particular instance was in the first session when we asked them to suddenly open up their handbags and create a little handbag museum out of whatever they had, and I think it did chew some of them a bit off. They were like, I must put up my objects but like but it's interesting because to just look at what they considered first putting on display, and not just that, but the way that they chose to arrange it, the kind of form it took. I mean, it's just a table with just things, but all those little details and those choices that they made told us there was great wealth in that kind of information that was coming through as well, and it's reflecting not just their personal experiences but also the greater society. Like a lot of them had hand sanitizers and masks, and we think immediately about COVID, but how the Tamil women specifically in the COVID kind of context is kind of handling the situation with a family, with work. So it was just very interesting to see those come to life, I think. Yeah.
But for Grace, did you see yourself more as a participant or part of the creative team or the curating
because
team?
I think halfway through I became a participant. Yeah, she will call and then she say, can you come and sit and be a participant? I say, yes, I will be. And then like the handbag thing, I also did my own museum to show. And even I also contributed pictures, and then I was also together with the other participants voting for which picture should need to be put up.
It wasn't a vote, you were adding notes on post-its.
Oh yes, we're adding notes on post-its, yes. Like why this resonates with me a lot. So it's more like to get information about that particular objects. But it was interesting, like, because in the workshop, that's when it's like there was this watch. It was just a watch. Okay. But when she put the watch as the object that she brought for one of the sessions, I was immediately saying, oh, I have the watch. My mom uses it. And then it's like every time my mom loses a watch, she goes back for the same watch.
Is
it's
this
a Casio or a Citizen watch. And it's always bought at Mustafa.
No, and it's interesting because I immediately jumped in. I was like, my mom always wore that to work, and she always likes the specific thin strap with that small oval face. And I was so surprised to think that this is a common thing, and there's something even Indian about that I did not even consider in something as mundane as a watch. So just to see, I think these kind of revelations come to life, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So moving on from the watch, did you have favorite objects that came through?
Yeah. I'm not supposed to pick favorites, but I do. And this is a favorite because well, if I could just say one more other thing about the curation process, right? I mean, ultimately, I think we had about 45 to 50 suggestions, but I narrowed it down to 29 because 29 is a prime number. And so it feels like, it's under construction. But in thinking about which objects to kind of highlight, I definitely wanted objects that were familiar, that everyone knows, oh yeah, that's an Indian thing, but whose narrative we've kind of subverted. I wanted objects that would be educational in that even Tamil women learn something about themselves, and mostly it was about their history. So things like the rubber cutting knife or the road sweeping broom came in there. And the third category, and this was my favorite category, which is things that are very mundane, but that we, you kind of need to be reminded that, oh yeah, this is very, familiar and important in our lives. And so something like the typography of the D/O, which is part of our names and gives us such a headache, we wanted to put it up there. But my favorite object came in actually the very last session, and it was just in a side conversation I was having with some of the participants. Someone mentioned how if she was leaving her auntie's house and she was bringing meat or a meat dish home, she would be given a nail because the superstition is that the nail will keep you safe from the supernatural. And then the second person went, oh, I do that too. And then I went, I do that too. And then we realized that we're all from different religions, and yet we have this same idea of you have to carry the nail because it's going to protect you. And the nail is so mundane. It's on its face also not a very feminine object. But has such an important life in our Tamil women's
Did you all
lives.
take out your nails? Or
No, because we won't carry meat.
right.
Yeah.
So it's just for meat. It's not just to protect you generally.
No.
Usually when you
against-
carry a meat and
Yeah.
you travel about, they will.
Okay. What is it about meat though?
It's potent. It attracts
Okay.
beings.
Because out of hunger or desire?
Yeah.
Okay. Very interesting.
If I may just add on to that, for me, my most favorite object is the biscuit tin, and that was because my late grandmother used to store her jewelry in a biscuit tin, and because her rationale was, firstly, she did not really trust the banks to store her jewelry carefully, and secondly, she said if you keep in jewel cases and all, and if a burglar comes in, it's easy for them to take and run, whereas nobody thinks to look for
Things in
precious things inside mundane objects like the biscuit things, which actually is really clever that you don't think of. And she taught me to start saving when I was in primary school by giving me a store cream cracker biscuit tin, and it was fun to just put coins in there and rattle the tin when I was a kid. And even now as an adult, I still have a piggy bank, and I just repurposed a cream wafer biscuit tin. I mean, I could just get a $2 piggy bank from Daiso. And then I could do that, but I don't know. It's just that memory of and the idea of just repurposing something without putting it to waste, I think, was inculcated. And for me, I think that's a sentimental value in having that. So now I'm putting all my loose change there, and also it's just convenient to take out loose change when you need to. But also very importantly, I think that object. And I didn't realize it until the workshops that it spoke so much about Tamil women's relationship to banking and finance, because that is also the main medium in which they conducted a lot of their financial transactions, whether it be gold or money. And we are talking about the taunting kutu kind of tradition, and it's really so much associated that tin can, which I didn't really know about until the workshop. So it's just very fascinating. That's something that we can perhaps dismiss as being mundane or irrelevant, having so much value to women in a different time where resources were scarce and they had to make do with what they have. So yeah, that was particularly fascinating for me.
Yeah, I read that. I was really interested to learn that aside from the fact they held the purse strings, but they were also thinking about how to become financially independent in case something happened, like they were buying gold to protect. I mean, I don't think we learned that kind of those lessons.
Yeah,
growing
because
up.
I think as men, we I guess we always assume that because women just love gold, right? They love to just accumulate and for aesthetic reasons, but we never really know it's actually a real investment, because even if everything else fluctuates in the market, gold always has a very steady kind of value to it, and women knew this very well. So it was not just about them buying to just look pretty, but for them it's really an investment into their own future. In case anything goes wrong in the family or in business, they always have that safe investment to carry them through hard times. And many women always had to face that, because in a situation of financial crisis, the first person you go to is probably your mother or the woman of the household, who will then take her gold to let you to pawn it to starve off that current financial crisis. And and that is just place that very gives you that idea of the importance that women gave to just thinking about future planning and financial planning that men, honestly, I don't think actually really do in our time.
And Grace, did you have a favorite?
Okay, for me, it's under the object category, but it's not specifically object. It's a link to a YouTube to a video.
What is it, rap?
It's the rap. Yes,
okay.
correct. It's about the Villu Pattu, which is a storytelling equipment that we use with belled bow. Yeah, I think that was particularly unique because she's a local Singaporean woman, Lady Cash, and she's pretty popular in India. And the way that she's presenting a traditional element, a Villu Pattu, in a rap format, I thought that was very captivating, and it made me really want to work more in that style. That's one, and I've never seen the video until she has showed it to us. So I was like, okay, that's cool, really cool.
The extra cool thing about that object is that we got Lady Cash herself to contribute a personal note about having made that music video and what it means to her.
What did she say? I didn't read the notes for that.
Oh, it's pretty long. Go read it.
Okay, so just the last thing about objects. You mentioned that there was no race to objects. In that sense, does it mean that the museum could also represent all women who may be invisible, and if so, in what sense do you think?
Sure, yeah, so objects themselves don't innately have race, but because they enact human lives, they play with other objects in a person's life, they play with the person himself. So they kind of are inflected, by the person. So to answer your question, perhaps some of the objects in the museum could also tell the story of other marginalized women or just other women. But does the museum itself do that? Not quite, because these objects are definitely framed in light of the Singaporean Tamil women. Yeah.
I think this question is like a bit difficult to answer as well, because for me it feels like both a yes and a no sort of a situation, because there is a reason why we've chosen to be specific about who we are catering this museum for, but the objects themselves, and maybe because we are in Singapore, they share so many intersections with women from other races or cultures that we just cannot exclude even if we wanted to. So yes, it is for the Tamil women, and maybe that's the primary target, but also it does not necessarily in any way exclude other women from wanting to join the conversations or the narratives about the objects themselves. So that's what I think.
But what would be great if, say, some other woman saw an object and thinks, oh, I have this too, or anyone else sees this and oh, my mother has this too. Then is an understanding that we actually share a lot more than we realize. And sometimes these things are at home, and that's why we don't see it so often. Yeah.
And sometimes it's not really about some big grandiose kind of debates or discussions about what race is or what race relations should be, but just these very minute details or the very strong kind of personal narratives, or just sharing, oh, we share this similar relationship to this object, and therefore the conversations can bloom naturally from there. I think that is a very beautiful notion that I think the museum has so far brought about, and in the responses that I've seen online on social media, I think it's just been very heartening to see how conversations can flow in that way.
Yeah. Okay. But also, like, the flip side of it is to recognize that maybe even if we share a similar object, for instance, the PE shots, right? Our relationships to it can be so very different, so someone else might be, PE shorts I can just wear anytime, whereas for a lot of Tamil women in Singapore, it's such a tension-filled object, people fight with their mothers in order to wear shorts, so to recognize that actually our lives are different, even though we share things, but there are things that we do share and have very similar stories for, just learn more.
Yeah. Just one more question that came up. How do you bring that object to a different level, a different sensory level? So either the emotional side or the psychological side, so that the object is really just the genesis of understanding the nuances of what it means to be either a Tamil woman or a woman in general.
Yeah, it's recognizing that the object also is not static, right? I mean, literally the object's not grow legs and walk around, but what I mean by it's not static is that we move around it, it moves around us so very differently for each person. And the idea of the marginal notes or the personal notes in the museum is that it kind of reveals these movements. So that's one way to try elevate it. Then the other way would be, like Raj says, to continue having that conversation. So whether you have seen a museum object with a friend who is very much like you or a friend from a different community, have those conversations with your friend, and be like, oh, do you know what this is? And then, or do you not? Do you have one at home? I use it this way. How do you use it this way? You just build and then learn something about each other. Yeah.
So let's talk about Tamil women, because these two works are centered around her. Could we have perhaps give us a more like a historical context of when Tamil women started being visible, maybe like literally in the community in Singapore?
Yeah. So the migration of Tamil women to Singapore and Malaysia, and this migration is very much intertwined, would be as early as Tamil men were coming, right? And I don't mean like the early Chola traders who were coming to this region, but I mean the colonial kind of migration, because pretty much as soon as men were being brought here to work in the plantations, women too were being brought along in the same structures of indenture and then later the Kangani system. And even before indenture, when Singapore was essentially a penal colony, there were women convicts as well. So some of them would have been Tamil. So to answer your question, Tamil women were here pretty much as soon as Raffles was.
And so the idea of them being invisible, can you track that in some way through history?
Sure. When we're thinking about visibility, it's about the kinds of conversations we do have today, and the kinds of, and I don't just mean like discourse that we talk about, but also the works, right? The textual discourse that we have. And what we often find is that the Tamil woman is not named or even as a label, a general category of label, not mentioned in a lot of our texts. Or, the text might say Tamil people and just kind of, in a very broad stroke, just cover everybody and not recognize the very specific ways in which women's lives were slightly different from men's lives. So that's the kind of invisibility I was thinking of. And a big part of this invisibility also stems from this kind of sources historians use, which is the textual archives. Because of the nature of work and class and literacy, Tamil women did not leave a lot of written documents, right? So you will not find their letters in the archives. Official documents might not record their full names or their full histories. And so in the kind of understanding we have today of what is history, when we want a recognizable name, a recognizable face, and a recognizable lineage, that's very hard to trace for Tamil women in Singapore if you work through the traditional archives. Whereas if you recognize and start working with alternative archives like family histories, that's where you can find the Tamil woman, right? Because we know who our mothers are, we know who our grandmothers are, they know who their grandmothers were, so we can still trace those lineages and those kind of like oral histories of the family that still passed down generation to generation.
So within your families, did you find an intentionality to create that oral history of passing down traditions and understanding of the women in your family? Was there any of that?
Sure.
I'm not sure if there was like very concrete sort of intentionality behind it, but it was more of, I guess, happenstance in the sense that, especially what I've noticed in my own family, because and when it comes to objects in our family specifically, like there was a need to always kind of preserve and take care of these objects, and the main concern was, especially from my mom, was about handing over certain of these objects to my sisters or to to future generations. And that is where then those narratives about how these objects were acquired, who got them, how have they been preserved, and those kind of associated stories come naturally into play. So I don't think there was any kind of conscious thought about like we want to write down these stories, or like we want to take note of our history specifically, but it's because of that intention of preserving the heritage itself, then that kind of spills over into the preservation work that women have been doing so naturally without any fuss or do. And it's just been very like I've been in awe sometimes of seeing this happen so organically, and I'm like thinking, but on society level, you have all these institutions and all these campaigns to like do all this preservation work, and yet these women and these families have been doing it without a fuss or without a word, like for generations, and that is not being recognized, I think, a lot. And that is the work I think we should be doing in recognizing these modes of preservation or of narrative capturing.
What I found,
Yeah.
and this is quite funny now that I think about it, is that the remembering and the forgetting come together. I'm thinking about the way my grandmother would just randomly start going off and recalling a story. And suddenly it's revealed that her mother spoke Telugu and she spoke Telugu growing up. And then I find out that my mother understands Telugu.
Oh.
And so this is a whole other language. I mean, it's in a neighboring region from the Tamil-speaking parts. And then I start piecing things together and realize a whole bunch of Telugu speakers came to Singapore at the same time the Tamil speakers were coming. And because these borders between languages didn't mean as much back then, what people who were essentially Telugu are all now Tamil. So if you ask my grandmother, like, what are you? She'll say, I'm Tamil. And then the story goes, actually, I was Telugu. So there's it's not an intentional erasure, it's just a kind of development of identity,
But what does that mean for you? Because it's also a question of language.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again,
I feel less bad about not speaking my mother tongue because apparently it's not my mother tongue. Yeah.
So I have one question. I just stumbled across this proverb, and I can't say it in Tamil, but when it's been translated, it's through women is being and through women is downfall. Would you know the Tamil version? Yes. So it's just this idea of the omnipotent power of women, or Tamil women in particular. And do you feel like, because the question is whether the invisible, is this a form of subordination? And if so, by whom?
I think it's a large level of hypocrisy at play, like to be frank about it, because I think culture-wise we tend to put women figures on a pedestal, and we call it goddesses, divine, and that's where kind of the saying kind of comes from in that sense as well. But then on a societal level, do we actually follow through from what we say in the scriptures? It's a whole different thing. I mean, there's patriarchy, there's toxic masculinity, blah blah blah, and all these are not exactly helping women a lot. But then how much are we actually recognizing these problems on the ground level and allowing women to be just free from them, and maybe giving them space to establish their own identities or to establish their own boundaries, to say, I want to do this, I don't want to do this, don't force me into this. So I think there's just those kind of ideas that we have to kind of negotiate. So it's not about like not taking pride as a woman, or not saying like, I don't have pride in my culture, but it's more of like giving them the choice to be what they want to be or what they want to uphold, which unfortunately I think is still a bit of an issue that I have to admit as a guy. It's just that.
But I think something that our participants kind of remind us every week is that, the structures aside, and within and in spite of the structures, of patriarchy, of hierarchy, Tamil women are very proud to be Tamil women. Yeah.
I mean, the title itself is a pride. It's a title filled with pride. To be called a Thamizhachi is something that I'm proud to be.
And I think that's what a lot of participants responded to initially as well when they heard about what the museum was. They were like, oh my God, I've never heard this being used in like years or in traditional media. And that's what they were intrigued by, to come and participate.
Yeah, the word really got to them. But to see it, given this space, to see it as the title of a whole piece, to see it elevated, so to speak. You know,
Because in usual, it's the male version that's more popular. Tamil.
Yeah.
They'll say, I'm a Tamil. It's a male version. So
Yeah.
to see the Thamizhachi, it's like, whoa,
yeah.
that's power, you know?
So let's talk about Rasanai. So I guess this was about histories, right? About coming to terms with your histories and discovering your histories. Should we start with Grace? Like Grace is very much leading this performance.
Yeah.
Okay, what do you want to
What's
know?
the question?
I guess just have an idea of where Rasanai comes from and how you even started to.
You can actually
take
to
that.
build
Yeah,
it.
she can take that.
Yeah. So the subtitle is an invitation to appreciate, and that's what we want to do. We want to invite people to kind of notice and then appreciate the Tamil woman as she is in her space, the way she already is. You know, so it's not to kind of only highlight special cases. Or to only highlight something wonderful and grand as contributions, but to see again like the everyday ways of the Tamil woman as something really full, you know, to recognize her labor in mundane ways and also in historical periods and episodes, right? So that's kind of the guiding principle, right? To see her hand at work all the time. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the play itself has taken multiple changes along the way since it's first written. So there were historical contents, a lot of it, and there still is, because it is still a historical exploration in one angle. So that part is still there. But besides this, there's a narrative that's now pulled in, so it's become more of a play rather than a lecture performance that it was initially intended to be. So there is a beautiful narrative story. We shouldn't give out too much, right?
Yeah.
No.
No spoilers,
No.
I think.
But I think we
tease.
can say that it's an invitation to notice her hands and to see her hands, but it's also an invitation to kind of follow her along as she thinks about what history is and what it means to remember.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
I think that's our tease.
We can't say more than that.
So how much of your own personal histories had to come out?
Actually, quite a bit.
Yeah, quite a bit. I think.
Yeah.
I think like co-writing this piece, I mean, I only wrote small segments. I think the majority of the narrative arc kind of goes to hers. I think there was an instance when we were looking about food, and then I had like this childhood memory of my mom, and you know when I was being difficult about eating lunch or dinner, you know what she used to do was to actually make rice balls. So she'll roll up the rice into rice balls. And what she did was she hid the vegetables inside because she knows I hate vegetables, and then put meat on top of the rice ball because I love meat. So and that's how she fed me food and made sure I ate well. So I think it was those kind of memories, just kind of looking back, and I think then in my own way kind of appreciating the kind of work that our mothers and our caretakers and the women in our lives have taken that part in our personal histories, and I think we've all kind of drawn a lot of our personal histories into this work because yes, it's about our personal family and the kind of struggles that they're going on with self-identity, with their relationships, with trying to remember or the process of not trying to forget about things. But it's I think starting from that micro level that it then expands to that macro level of what it means to actually really look at history and not just at what has been written in the textbooks or by institutions or what they've marked out as what history should be for us. It's about our turn to kind of reclaim these narratives and to kind of link them back to our personal lives and say, you know, either this makes sense or this doesn't make sense to me, and I will now make the choice. And I think Rasanai kind of encapsulates that very beautifully in that kind of personal stories that the characters are kind of going through, and the kind of choices that they are making in the acts of remembering or not forgetting, as she spoke about earlier.
So the narrative arc is very much a story. So there's a conflict and a resolution in some way. So I guess personally, how did you resolve maybe certain things that you were going through in your lives through Rasanai?
I don't think it's resolved.
No?
Still a
Or
whole
did you start
PhD
something?
to do. No, I don't think it's resolved. I almost don't want it to be resolved because maybe it's just me. I just really like having questions in my head, right? But it was definitely nice to put down in words things I've heard my grandmother say, or things like kind of contestations I've heard like aunties and uncles as well, have. And to just be able to reflect onto the page and then onto the screen. The tensions in the community already about what is our history, what should be our history, So I don't want to resolve this because I kind of like the drama.
So the idea of the occluded hand, can we kind of unpack that? Can you tell me about what your definition of occlusion was? Was it a sense of exclusion, a sense of preventing someone's voice from being heard? Can you explain?
So for me, what I was trying to get at is the hand that we don't recognize as work. The labor that we don't already recognize as labor. And often these categories are quite colored with masculine lenses, right? So when we think of a laborer, we think of a construction worker. Whereas a laborer is also the cleaning auntie. It's also the mother who's grinding through with the heavy stone in order to cook dinner. All of that is labor. All of that requires sweating, right? And requires muscle. And so that's the kind of occlusion I was trying to get at, the kind of shifting categories or relocating categories that are familiar. The other kind of occlusion that I was trying to get at is also what is considered worthy of our memory and of our celebration. So like I said, I am definitely not interested in the highlights or the special contributions, the 1%. I'm very much interested in celebrating the everyday. Yeah.
And I think for me, when I was looking at this idea of occlusion in itself, it kind of brought me back to the museum itself. I mean, I'm not a historian or anthropologist. That's our expert here. But I think when Vithya, in her very first workshop session, the very first thing she did was to present about the current museum displays that were available to us and what actually was being seen there. And I think it was kind of a shock for me to see, firstly, the little that is there about the Indian community itself, and then the little that is there about the women present in this community, and not even naming them, or not giving them names. And then the kind of objects that were being displayed that were always more or less domestic, or very gender specific to what we normally kind of just associate them with, and there's no effort to kind of relook at these objects or to relook at the categories that's being given. So I think that was eye-opening in that sense, and then I think that kind of fed into how we were looking at Rasanai, to look at alternative narratives or alternative kind of objects or stories that we don't normally hear, especially in the very personal context of the family, and then relating them back to the bigger histories that we've always kind of maybe talked or heard about, but we don't really kind of feel associated with them because they've always, I guess, the institutions or the people at power who are deciding this for us have always put it in a certain way that's felt very inaccessible, or something that's too far away for us. But I think that's what we've tried to reclaim in Rasanai in itself, that yes, a lot of it is personal and not very perhaps informational based, but the kind of content that is in this production, I think, speaks a lot to people who may not agree with what the authorities or what the national institutes may be putting at play, and would want their own voice to be heard about what these objects or these histories mean to them. And I think we've tried our best in that respect to give that importance, especially in the family context, because that's what we kind of relate to, the first thing that we relate to, and that's how that it goes outwards towards the society.
And how do you, I guess, after you've performed this work, how do you ensure that it lives on? Because all this blood, sweat, and tears that you've put into it, right? Is it just going to, who's going to remember for you, I guess, in a way?
I'll remember. It's okay. Well, what I would like is if the audience who've seen it, and even if those who haven't seen it but hear about it. No, wait, first of all, go see it, right? So for the audience who have seen it, that they find ways or hopefully are moved enough to apply those same lenses onto their own lives, and onto their own family's history. So even if it means after watching our show, they go ask their moms or their grandmothers, did this happen to you? Do you know about this person? Do you know about this time period? What were you doing in this time period? That to me is perfect. Yeah, that it's already an expansion of the work.
Yeah.
I think for me personally, I think for this Rasanai in particular, I think what I would like hopefully for them to take away is the kind of images that are present in this, which I think as a director, Grace has very beautifully, I think, captured some moments. It's not all just talking and talking. Some moments are just about looking at these visuals that we all kind of know and grow up with, but we don't widely associate as part of our identity, and then trying to just make these everlasting images that the audience can take away. So even if this is a one-time performance, I think hopefully the kind of images and the things that they see or hear through this performance, hopefully they can do the remembering for us, to carry out further conversations either with us or with the community at large. And hopefully that memory will be kind of our service back to the community, to give them that moment for them to appreciate, even if it's just a night. But like just to revel in that moment, I think is already such a big enough occasion for us.
Like the thing about Rasanai is that it's a multi-sensory performance, right? So I mean, on top of the basic plot line kind of talky stuff going on, there's also visuals, specifically short visuals. There is music, and wonderful music designed by sound designer Ramesh Krishnan, who is great. And for those who get the dinner package, there is the dinner meal by Chef Asantara. So there are all these ways to also access the sensation of the moment, right? So yeah, the history is very cerebral, but if people forget that, it's fine, because if at least what they remember is a little tingling in their fingers, a little like, oh, that note is nice, or what's that sound? That's already a way of our stories kind of living on in their bodies, and that would also be a really nice expansion.
I think you've put it so nicely that it's not just about looking at figures or statistics or like whatever dates that we're looking at, but like just all these sensorial details of the body, which I think Grace was very careful from the start to kind of curate all these choices that she chose to put in the work. Maybe you can kind of talk a bit more about that.
Nice segue.
For me, it's like there are certain images that I felt that was important to be shown, because it is talking about the Tamil women in a way. It is about Tamil history in a way. So there were certain objects that I felt that needed to be shown. So in terms of visual, I don't want to tell you exactly what I shot.
Sure.
You should watch the show, to be honest. But there are certain things that everybody will definitely relate to as a memory, for one. And there are certain audios which people will definitely be humming and going off with. And of course, the context of how the story is right now, right? The content of it, right? There is something that will definitely make them go back and ask their parents more references, or even Google it. We'll never know.
So this is all very intriguing. I mean, is there a universal quality to it too? So what I'm saying is, even if you're not Tamil, please watch this.
Definitely, because this is my personal opinion, because right now in Singapore we work on a let's tolerate one another policy, but I think the best policy to work on is if we understand one another. So if you want to know a little bit more about us, understand us, you should watch this show. I personally feel that.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the dinner component of it.
Yes.
You created it with the chef.
Yes.
And so what can we
Okay,
aspects
so
from
Grace
that?
and I tasted it, so we can tell you firsthand it's definitely top notch.
Yes.
And we're saying this as people who have, grown up eating Tamil cuisine, and that's the kind of food you're going to get, right? But the way Vasantara has kind of created the components of the menu and put them together, it is, I know she hates this word, but it is elevated, and it's complex and it works. It's a story in of itself.
There's so many layers to every dish that she has created.
Literally as well.
Yeah, literally. You feel you can every single element that she has explained in the dish as to why she chose to do it, you will have the taste in your mouth.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, like the kind of histories that's embedded, I think, in that food choices as well. I think that was so masterfully done and curated.
Because when we first started on the show, right, because we actually curated the entire show based on the menu as well.
Yeah.
It was kind of back and forth.
Yeah.
So I kind of told Vasantara, okay, these are the historical moments we want to hit. And with each moment, like kind of what is the takeaway theme we're trying to get at. And that's how she planned the menu as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the person eating it would have to be quite restrained. Like they have to eat certain dishes at certain points. I mean, to get the most out of it.
No.
Not necessarily.
It is laid out as an appetizer, a main, and a dessert. So I think
Not
you
like Act
kind
1,
of can
Act
do
2
that.
or
No. I mean, the entire performance will be about an hour 15.
Yeah.
So you can enjoy your meal as you watch the performance. Or if you're a fast eater, you can finish it and still enjoy your the performance.
Because what will happen is, as you're watching, you would be like, oh, that's about this dish.
Yeah, there's a relation because there's definitely a mention of the dishes and different portions of it.
But it's dinner, so eat as you will. Don't have to wait for the instructions.
Okay, and there's also this charitable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all the money that's paid for the dinner will go to good causes.
The dinner ticket is a charitable donation as well, and so the funds generated from there go to T-Care, and T-Care covers 4 beneficiaries. So it's not just a dinner, a show. It's dinner, a show, and good times and good work.
Yes, we have to do your goodwill.
Yes.
It's a shame. Yeah, a shame we can't actually do it physically. Okay, thank you so much. I know you're really exhausted because of all the rehearsals. So let's just wrap it up a bit. I think maybe try and bring it back to TWorks and these 2 works being presented within the Now Festival. How is that significant for you? Because it is a festival of women as well, but not specifically for any particular race. So
I think that's also what was important. It's not just to do Tamil work only for Tamil audiences, even if it's only for Indian audiences, but since the whole point is to make visible, obviously we want to present it to a larger audience and make ourselves visible. But also because this is the platform, it also means that women who didn't previously feel very attached to the label of being a Tamil woman still have access to the piece, or the pieces rather. So in that kind of context, the Now Festival platform works really well. The other side of it is that the Now Festival platform is about women, right? And what's also really nice in the whole process is to see non-Tamil women also say, oh, I know this thing, or I've heard this thing, I've seen my friend use this thing. So we kind of find commonality amongst ourselves as women. So it's also quite reaffirming in that way.
And I think being a part of, the larger festival itself, I think it really cements the fact that there is interest and a want to know more about this particular community or the Tamil women specifically, and who she is and what we should look out for. And I think it's been a great platform to be able to do that, to be given the freedom to explore and work on these 2 works themselves. And I think in particular TWorks and Norlina herself, I think they have been very open in the way that they have chosen to kind of listen to us and to our stories, and in that kind of decision making that we've done in kind of curating the content or the elements that go into both the museum and the performance. I think it's been very encouraging for us to see them the way that sometimes it's just enough for them to take a step back and listen to what we are coming up with, and then for them to kind of experience the things that we have grown up with, but not necessarily they have known about. So I think that kind of interactions and the synergy that we've had being part of this festival, I think has been very valuable, and hopefully opens more doors for this particular work or for any other works in the future to open it up for wider audiences.
I think the additional benefit of the festival structure is that we got an amazing intern. Seriously, he's also Lalita's an intern, and she's been with us from like the start of the process, helping organize the workshops, helping kind of put together and organize the website process. And now she's also got a bit of a hand in the Rasanai performance, and just meeting people like her and our participants has been the additional cherry on top of this cake.
And Grace, what do you hope people will take away from specifically Rasanai?
It's a very good question. Okay, for me, I think people will take away a lot of things. Better understanding about us, definitely. And more importantly for us is to have our voices heard. So I think that's a very important aspect that we always want to present to people. Yeah.
We haven't explained what the word Rasanai means.
Yeah, that's true.
Appreciation, you said that right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That was the subtitle. Okay, So Rasanai means to appreciate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, Rasanai actually also means taste,
Yeah,
which is the
that's
food element of it.
Yeah.
So appreciation. Okay. So how do these two
Because when we
words
started with the
interrelate?
title Rasanai,
Yeah.
Rasanai actually can be seen in two ways. One is to taste, and one is to also to appreciate.
Yeah.
So we're trying to merge both together, and that's why it's an invitation to appreciate.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's used in the sense that and it's not just taste as in the taste of food, but to pay attention to that taste and to think about it for a little bit. And when it's used in the form of appreciation, it's usually like to appreciate music, to appreciate art. So it's a kind of appreciation that is it's not passive, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, on that note, do you have any last words you'd like to share?
Well,
Watch the show.
Yes, watch the
Yes,
show.
please come watch the show.
Yes, definitely.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a really, really lively conversation. I really enjoyed it. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you for having
Thank you
us.
so much.
Okay.